Then with a rush, it leaped across the fissure. The flames roared up to greet it, and wreathed about it, and a black smoke swirled in the air. Its streaming mane kindled and blazed behind it. In its right hand was a blade like a stabbing tongue of fire, in its left hand a whip of many thongs.
The Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings, Book 2, Chapter 5, The Bridge of Khazad-dûm.
Balrogs, powerful, fiery demonic monsters.
We first see one portrayed in Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, as Durin's Bane. He was almost as tall as the ceiling of Moria's second hall, so terrifying that even the goblins feared it. How powerful were the Balrogs? Were they really as frightening as we see them in the film? Welcome to Fantasy Archive. Today we'll delve into the mysterious Balrogs of Morgoth, their origin, loyalties, and the abilities that made them so legendary. Balrogs were among the top dreaded monsters in Middle-earth. They were spirits with hearts of fire that could surround themselves entirely in darkness and shadow. They were also Morgoth's faithful servants. You see, Balrogs used to be Maya, just like Saruman, Radagast, and Gandalf, but they were corrupted by the Valar Melkor. After Melkor fell into darkness, they followed him into Arda, and became his evil servants, taking the shape of demons with whips of flame. They became the oldest and most faithful servants he had, second only to Sauron, eventually being referred to as the Balrogs of Morgoth. Though we know many existed, there are but a few known Balrogs. There's Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs. He was the High Captain of Angband, personally responsible for the killing of 2 High Kings of the Noldor. He carried a whip of fire, but was known for wielding a great black axe. Durin's Bane, found in Moria, reason why the dwarves left their home Khazad-dûm, and Lungothin, the second most powerful Balrog after Gothmog. He was in charge of Angband's safety. Contrary to the gigantic size Durin's Bane has on film, in appearance, Balrogs are large humanoid beings, slightly larger than elves. They were surrounded by fire and shadow and wielded fiery whips and flaming swords. They could ignite and engulf themselves in flame and darkness, radiating power and inflicting terror in both friends and foes. The Balrogs were Morgoth's most dreadful and feared servants. Their goal was to support Morgoth in taking over Arda. Their entire purpose was to serve Morgoth. However, they weren't always the creatures of fire and shadow we are familiar with. So how did their relationship with Morgoth begin? It started when they first joined Melkor in his discordance in the music of the Aina. They resonated with him, and upon his fall, they followed him. Over the years, Melkor brought many into his service. After Melkor destroyed the 2 lamps, the first sources of light in Arda, he gathered his servants in his first fortress of Atumno, in the northern part of the world. Eventually, after trying to repair the damage done to the earth, the Valar moved against the Dark Lord, and Melkor was defeated in the Battle of Powers. His fortress was also destroyed. After their master's defeat, the Balrogs fled west to Melkor's secondary fortress, Angband. There, along with Sauron, they waited years for their master's return. It was not until ages later that Melkor managed to escape his captivity. Having promised the giant spider Ungoliant to sate her hunger, they joined forces and destroyed the 2 trees of Valinor and escaped with the most prized treasure of the elves, the Silmarils. 3 gems that contained the true light of the trees. Ungoliant consumed the sap of the trees and grew in size. After Melkor and Ungoliant arrived in Beleriand, Ungoliant demanded more jewels. After handing over part of the lesser jewels, Melkor attempted to withhold the Silmarils. Having seen through Melkor's plan to break his promise, Ungoliant, now grown to a massive size, threatened to destroy the weakened Melkor. Hearing Melkor's cry for help from Angband, the Balrogs ran across the lands of Beleriand like a tempest of fire. Using their fiery whips, they broke off her attack, saving their master. Ungoliant preferred not to face these great fiery demons and fled. Melkor ordered the Balrogs to let her go and follow him to Angband. In the First Age, the elves had their first encounter with the Balrogs in Dagor Nuin Gileath, Battle Under the Stars. After the victory of the Noldorian elves over Morgoth's forces in this battle, the elf lord Fëanor, with great pride, moved on towards Angband, to defeat Morgoth himself, but the entire group of Balrogs came up against him to protect their lord. He was surrounded and fought long against them before being mortally wounded by Gothmog, the lord of the Balrogs. Though Feanor's son, Maedhros, fought off the demons of fire and rescued his father, Feanor died of his wounds soon after. Gothmog and his Balrogs would continue to play a vital role in Morgoth's war against the elves and men of Middle-earth. Years later, in the Battle of the Sudden Flame, a force of Balrogs was released alongside Gladwin, the very first dragon. A 400-year control of Angband was broken, and the area of Ardgalan was consumed in rivers of flame, becoming the desert plain of Anfoglyph. During the Wars of Beleriand, Morgoth only came out of Angband on one occasion. Instead, he sent the Balrogs to fight and lead in battle. 2 of them would meet their end in the fall of Gondolin. Gothmog fought Ectelion of the Fountain, who he managed to disarm, but before dealing the final blow, Ectelion ran headfirst into the Balrog's chest, piercing it with his pointed helmet. Both would fall into the Fountain of the King. Gothmog's flames were quenched, and both would drown. The other Balrog would come to face Glorfindel, as he attempted to flee the city with his companions. Glorfindel fought alone and bested the Balrog by piercing its belly. As the demon fell towards a cliff, it grabbed the warrior's hair, and both fell to their deaths. The remaining Balrogs would continue to fight in the many battles of the War of Wrath. When Morgoth was defeated and cast into the void, some Balrogs escaped the destruction of Beleriand and hid deep underground in the depths of the earth. One Balrog fled to the east, where it would find its way into the depths of the Misty Mountains, and there it would remain dormant. More than 5 millennia passed, wars were fought, and kingdoms rose and fell in the lands above as the Balrog lay quiet beneath the earth, unaware of all of the happenings above. There are those who think that the Balrogs were unable to act in ways that would displease Morgoth, which is why, unlike Sauron, they did not attempt to create kingdoms of their own. Perhaps they did not care enough to bother. Old minds challenge the reputation of Balrogs, thinking they seem like mindless beasts that cannot speak. They might not have their own agendas towards Middle-earth, but they were to be avoided. And although there is no mention since the Balrogs were Maya, it is likely they used Osanwe, or the communication of thought, to communicate with Morgoth, Sauron, and amongst themselves. As the Third Age drew on, Sauron raised the Tower of Dol Guldur nearby to the east, and this perhaps brought the Balrog back towards wakefulness. Then in the search of Mithril, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm delved down into the roots of the mountain, going deeper and deeper, seeking for the precious metal, only to come across the stirring demon. The Balrog rushed around in violence through Khazad-dûm. Then the king, Durin VI, was killed by its hand, and thus the Balrog became known as Durin's Bane. The dwarves did not immediately leave their homes, and some survived until the following year. Durin's heir and son, Nain, tried to kill the Balrog, but was also slain. At the time the dwarves of Khazad-dûm fled the ancient kingdom they had built thousands of years earlier. The darkened halls thus became Moria, the Black Chasm, or Pit. Just a few decades after Durin's Bane awoke, Sauron was driven from Dol Guldur for a long period. We know that the Nazgûl remained inactive during this watchful peace, so perhaps the same was true for the Balrog of Moria. This period lasted for some 4 centuries, but soon after Sauron's return, he began to send more of his creatures to Moria. There is no proof of the Balrog's allegiance to Sauron. It was faithful to Morgoth only, though it would likely kill anything or anyone who would cross its path. In the Battle of Azanul-Bizar, the young Dane Ironfoot saw Durin's Bane lurking within Moria, and the horror of the Balrogs prevented the dwarves from recolonizing their old mansions after their victory. Nearly 200 years later, Balin led an attempt to regain Khazad-dûm. That attempt ended in disaster for the dwarves, though it is unclear whether Durin's Bane played any direct part in the destruction of the ill-fated dwarf colony. The next and final definite sighting of Durin's Bane was 25 years after the failure of Balin's colony. At this time, the Fellowship of the Ring made their way through Moria as a means of crossing the Misty Mountains. And there they encountered not only Sauron's goblins and trolls, but ultimately the Balrog. There it was challenged by one of its order, a fellow mayor in the form of the wizard Gandalf. In the battle that followed, both Balrog and Wizard fell into the depths beneath Moria, but continued their fight for many days. Up the endless stair within the mountains until they reached the mountain peak of Silverton. There, at last Gandalf won the Battle of the Peak, killing down the creature that had existed in Arda since its most ancient times. It is far from certain that Durin's Bane was the last of the Balrogs. The Balrogs were originally envisioned as being immense in number. As Tolkien's work became more formidable and internally consistent, and the Balrogs more terrible, this number was much reduced. In the end, Tolkien stated that there were probably at most 7 Balrogs. We know 3 of them died. None of the other Balrogs are even mentioned in records, but it is thought that some remained after the end of the Third Age, hidden in deep places, where perhaps they will be awoken in ages to come.